Welcome back to the mid-morning session. We are going to alter it a little bit. We're going to have our panelists do a 5-minute presentation and then go sit down for the discussion. That is so that everybody can hear them. So I'm just going to start because we're running a tiny bit late now. Our first speaker is our moderator, Ira Rezak. He's Emeritus Professor of Clinical Medicine at State University of New York. He's also a board member of the Metal Collectors of America, and he is also on our medal committee that designed our beautiful Hephaestus medal that we have actually several examples of for sale today. So you can check in with Neil Musanti for that. But first we have Ira Rezak.
As they say in Monty Python, now for something entirely different. The theme for this panel, for this hour, and this audience, which I suspect collects mostly thematic medals, is the art of the medal. And we can leave it to other people to define the category of what a medal is. But it seems unavoidable to me to continue without asking what we in this room mean by art. Today, the word art generally suggests the realm of aesthetics, which is a value system culturally situated and inevitably colored by such fluid concepts as taste, expertise, subjective private opinion, and social consensus. Consequently, many of us here today may well disagree, and we may have a discussion about this later, about how to define or even to recognize art. Therefore, whether any given medal should be considered an art medal or an artistic medal. But there's also an earlier and more fundamental meaning of the term art, one that long precedes defining the word in aesthetic terms. And art, according to this concept and this point of view, is simply anything that is done skillfully. An aesthetically skillful person is an artist in both senses of the word, but the arts of medicine and the art of diplomacy have little to do with aesthetics, as do also artifacts and the productions of artisans. Now, there are reasons why this dichotomy of meaning is worth bearing in mind when we contemplate medallic art. First of all, it helps to explain why the so-called fine art museums only rarely feature medals, although today some have some medals. Why they privilege painting and sculpture, but consigned and historically have consigned medals along with jewelry, furniture, rugs, glass vessels, and other functional objects to a decidedly subordinate category, the so-called decorative arts. This conceptual division goes back to Aristotle, who distinguished the liberal arts, such as useful painting, that had no clear practical function and were practiced by slaves, by free men rather than slaves, who were highly skilled and who crafted, that is, were artisans of functional things. Thus, originally painters, sculptors, metal engravers, and others seen as being in this lesser category of skilled artisans until the Renaissance, when Alberti, a Renaissance humanist, reconceived the term art, now with a capital A, so to speak, as a category of skill that was imbued by the artist's intellect, his independent aesthetic sensibility. Painters and sculptors, in his opinion, made the cut, but carvers of seals and coins and metal dies who made functional objects did not. Another reason that this distinction has persisted is that medals were long commissioned by patrons for specific purposes, personal, commemorative, honorific. Those who actually executed the medals were seen as mere workers, no matter how beautiful the result. The idea of a medal as the free creation of an independent artist, one not commissioned by, beholden to, someone else's direction, seems first to have emerged only in the late 18th century, in the late 19th century. So most of the medals that we've seen today were purpose-driven, were patron-driven, and ordered by others, and the person who executed them was doing the bidding of somebody else. They weren't, in the first instance, a work of art from the artist's mind alone. Even today, I would say, and especially in this audience, the vast majority of medals are functional in the sense that they are made with a particular social purpose in mind, as a reward for scholars, or for sportsmen, as a commemoration of events and anniversaries, for the memorialization of rulers or other honorees, for many purposes that you all know. Very few medals, even at present, are created by artists based exclusively on their own personal inspiration. Purpose-driven medals may, of course, meet high artistic standards, as subsequent speakers will show you. And since the Renaissance, they have often done so. But since most people remain likely to think of medals as agents of some action or some other purpose, they are more often considered as objects rather than as works of art. Collectors, curators, historians, more often than not, focus on the medal's content, the depictions of famous persons such as Washington or Lincoln, the function as an award or a commemoration. And they are likely to perceive, to collect, to catalog such medals as exemplars of a series of like-themed objects. This perspective doesn't necessarily preclude an appreciation of the medal as art in an aesthetic sense, but I think it's fair to say that many, if not most, medal collectors privilege subject matter, theme, over beauty. Appreciation is certainly in the eye of the beholder, and choice is the inalienable prerogative of the individual collector, amateur, professional, or scholar. Thus, despite the majoritarian view just given, there are those who are primarily drawn to medals based on their stylistic characteristics. People collect classicism, Art Nouveau, Art Deco, and so forth. And these are familiar general artistic categories, and people collect them. But I suspect that there are a few in this particular room who do so. Collectors will inevitably, in any case, apply their personal judgment regarding the desirability of a particular medal, with such assessments ranging from preferences for historical significance or to the more subjective realm of aesthetic excellence. So let me conclude then by suggesting that the art of the medal is best understood as bridging rather than separating artistic conceptual design and technical skill, such as modeling and engraving, but that together they result in a material object in the hand which makes medallic content come alive.
So we will now hear from Robert Hoge, who is Curator Emeritus of the American Numismatic Society, and he will continue our discussion of art of the medal.
Thank you, Ira, for your lucid and thoughtful introduction to this subject and for providing me with the title for my discourse. For a finer appreciation of styles, however, I'd have to defer to my wife, who's an actual professor of art history. Be this as it may, I'd like to address some themes, one very broad one, actually tying to some of what Ira said regarding the work of the medal by a so-called artist, or perhaps someone without so much art. Many scholars accept the probability that the very large and especially handsome surviving high denominational coins of the ancient Greeks and Romans may have been produced for special non-currency reasons. But these are generally very similar in style to contemporary coins, even in some cases demonstrably coming from the hands of the same artists, and seem to have been issued as multiples of current monetary issues. The medal, as we use the term today in general, has its origins in the Italian Renaissance, with the appreciation of ancient coins that came about at that time. Seen through the eyes of the Renaissance humanist, ancient coins were small classical artworks, whereas coined money had changed so much during the previous 1,000 years that even scholars could not initially conceive of the possibility that those abundant objects from antiquity, often beautifully made, with actual identifiable portraits of people from the past and all sorts of informative, even propagandistic inscriptions, could be mere prosaic money. Finally, however, ancient metals came to be recognized as circulating coinage. The first true metals were something apart, personal exemplars of individuality for powerful people, or, self-important, would-be powerful, intentionally likening themselves to rulers of ancient times. They were not produced in large quantities for public consumption. Rather, they were for high-status princes and potentates to glorify themselves among their peers, cleverly using a link to the newly popular connection with antiquity, with authentic portraiture, and sometimes arcane stylistic tropes and heraldry relating to the individuals. Due to the work of Leonardo da Vinci, Benvenuto Cellini, and others unknown, machine manufacturing techniques were developed around this time. Milled productions gradually became more and more common for both Western European coins and metals. These techniques provided new options for both mediums. While through mass production, metals could assume a broader social context than mere prestige, they also lost some of their cachet in exclusivity, relating only to the powerful. A multiplicity of themes came to be represented in medallic creations. Personal metals remained important, but wartime movements, battles, massacres, and occasional treaties tended to predominate. The following centuries in Europe and elsewhere were particularly horrific, full of all kinds of mayhem, civil and religious strife. Issued for popular consumption, some warlike medallic pieces are crude and some are not. Some are handcrafted and others minted by machine. Some are scarce, while others very abundant. A connection between metals and wars was here to stay. The thoroughly planned series of productions orchestrated by Louis XIV of France, covering the course of his reign and especially his wars, and executed and engraved by the finest medallic sculptors of the day, are a bridge between high art and broad-spectrum social propaganda. Napoleon Bonaparte, a much more handsome man than Louis XIV, followed this neoclassical precedent closely, combining his elegant portrait effigy with styles and types relating specifically to Greco-Roman coins. Mass production of specific pieces for distribution to combatants became widespread from the period of the Napoleonic Wars, a custom that has proliferated to the present day. So, I would like to argue here that overall, medallic works show a noticeable tendency toward warlike subjects. In fact, we might not be remiss in thinking this the primary milieu of the medal. To recognize the members of the armed forces for campaigns and as awards for valor, military service medals have been manufactured in numbers much larger than any medals for other themes, and often in really vast quantities. Let us remember the significance of tomorrow's date, the timing, Armistice Day, Veterans Day. We can think of the basic public perception of what constitutes a medal, captured in the phrase, "Pin a medal on him." Whoops. This medal is a manifestation of power and a symbol intended to enhance social cohesiveness and assuage the negative implications of warfare. I'm sure you, learned audience, can conjure up a host of relevant issues. Curiously, today, medals are becoming once again confused with coinage. Witness the omnipresent challenge coins that play an important part in military ethos. Though originally created as mementos of armed forces services and related organizations, these colorful mementos of these organizations are often tasteless pieces now being used by businesses, civic groups, sporting events, and nonprofits as valuable components of marketing and recognition programs. Style is obviously of secondary importance. Where has art gone with these medals? For our discussion, I brought just a few images here together to kind of give us an idea of where we're going in terms of thinking about medallic works with the proliferation and preponderance of this militaristic and warlike theme. When we think of the very earliest medals, actually these relate to various types of warfare. The famous Heraclius Metal from the early 15th century refers to a predecessor of the Crusades, the capture of the True Cross by Heraclius and recovery of it from the Persians in the 7th century. The famous medal by Pisanello showing the Byzantine Emperor John VIII was actually a sort of continuation of the crusading idea in which the emperor was trying to align the forces of the West to assist the Eastern Empire in resisting the Turkish onslaught. By the time we look at a medal, for instance, by Giampaolo Poggini from celebrating the Treaty of Cateau-Cambresis, 1559 for the King Philip II of Spain, we can see a connection here between the individual and the idea of the importance of war. This actually was a medal which was thought to commemorate the war to end all wars. This was the end of the 65 years war of struggle to control the Italian states. Shortly after this, we have a period where medallic forms became much more democratic in a sense with the Sea Beggars Medallets of the Netherlands Republic. And even the jetons, the vast series of pieces issued in the Netherlands, are related very largely to themes of warfare. The English Civil War badges tended to predominate. The majority of these are actually of royalist issues. We see many portraits, effigies of the soon-to-be beheaded king, Charles I. But also we have examples of some of the first pieces actually awarded. For instance, over here on the right, issue of Essex, the parliamentarian commander, and the famous Dunbar Medal featuring Cromwell and with dies engraved by Thomas Simon, the greatest medallic sculptor of England in his time period. This may actually have been the first medal awarded for a particular campaign. I mentioned the propagandistic and beautiful medals of Louis XIV with his vast campaign of nearly 300 various different issues celebrating events of his reign, and the famous or infamous Admiral Vernon medals celebrating or pretending to celebrate occurrences during the War of Jenkins' Ear. And finally, we have what may have been the first medal issued celebrating a particular battle for all of the various combatants, the British medal celebrating the victory of Germantown against the Americans in 1777. Napoleon's vast issues, some of which I've been working with relatively recently, capture images that are very neoclassical and which became predominant in style in terms of the military medals issued throughout the 19th and into the 20th centuries. And now, though, we end up not only with these campaign medals and award medals, recognition, heroism, achievement, but the so-called challenge coins. Look at these. Are these what we think of as medallic works? Maybe this, maybe not. Maybe this is why they're called challenge coins. But I would submit that this really actually represents a kind of false analogy in thinking. These are really small medals. They all commemorate and celebrate a certain kind of thing, a group, a cohesiveness, and they incorporate designs, artistic or not. What is art, in other words? As Ira said, something we need to contemplate. Thank you.
We now have Scott Miller, who has collected medals for more than 40 years and is, as if I understand, 19th and 20th century? Well, he is up to tell us more about his passions for these medals. Scott.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Ira, for inviting me. Let's get our first slide back. Oh, okay. There we go. Okay. The period from the centennial celebration of 1876 until the United States entry into World War I has been called the American Renaissance. It was a period when the United States experienced increased awareness and pride in her history and accomplishments. The future looked bright with ever-increasing industrial and technological growth, trade, and wealth. Business tycoons thought of themselves as successors to the great princes of Europe's Renaissance and often created private collections of art and decorative objects. As the fortunes of the country grew, so did the number of American artists. Young sculptors who previously went to Italy for training now studied in France, where they were exposed to the work of medalists such as Chapoux, Roti, and Ponscarme. The new group of French medalists embraced the artistic and technological changes that were transforming medallic art. Since the time of Pisanello, medals were commemorative objects, honoring individuals and historical or contemporary events. The earliest medals were the products of artists and cast in metal. However, the similarities between medals and coins were soon noticed, and while some medals were still cast in metal, some were still cast, most were soon struck from dies that were engraved by artisans. Certain technological developments in the 19th century, most notably the reducing machine, allowed sculptors rather than trained die engravers to design medals. Both the technology and the infusion of new artistic abilities changed the look and subject matter of medals. While commemorative medals were still issued, art medals, for lack of a better term, medals that were not related to specific individuals or events, also became popular, especially in Europe. Other changes included elimination of the raised rim and variations in shape and finish. While France led the way in the new medal, other European countries soon followed with modern designs that often reflected the graphic and decorative art of the period. And over here we have three medals. The center one is George Washington's centennial of his inauguration by St. Gaudens. That is probably the first popular medal in the new style in this country. In the bottom right, a portrait medal by Roti, and which has the new shape. Medals no longer have to be round. And on the upper left, it's L'étude. It's basically a mother reading a book to a child by Ovigensis. And if you notice, it's no longer commemorative of anything. It's just pretty. And there's no rim. There's a rather slightly rounded edge to it. So this is the new look of the medal in France. Okay. Upon completion of their training in France, American sculptors returned home and embarked on careers where medals were often a regular, though sometimes secondary output to their larger work. Portrait medals are popular with the newfound rich, with commissions to Augustus St. Gaudens, Adolph Weinman, Victor D. Brenner, and John Flanagan, to name just a few. In keeping with the then current development in the art world, their approach to medallic portraiture went well beyond the standard bust to the left or bust to the right. Portraits showed greater modeling, they could be off-center, and were at times more family-oriented, as women and children were often the subject of medals. Some medalists also borrowed design elements from painters, such as Janet Scudder, and that's hers there on the right. She often put a frame, just as you would a picture, on her portrait medals. And other medalists showed people engaged in activities at home. The one on the bottom left is by Adolph Weinman, the rocking horse baby, and it's a child engaging in play, something that would generally have been unheard of a generation earlier. Prominent Americans were shown in everyday attire, and unlike European counterparts who were often shown in uniform or academic robes, wearing medals, or showing a coat of arms, it was everyday attire. Even Native Americans were displayed in two series of medals, first by Olin Levi Warner, and that's one on the right, Chief Joseph, and then later, upstairs there are a few, in a series by Edward Sawyer. Besides portraiture, medals were used by increasingly prosperous civic, educational, and commercial entities. Medals became a standard form of award and often displayed a higher level of artistic merit than previously available. Moreover, despite their training in France, American sculptors created medals that helped promote a national identity. The working class, fresh-faced and upright, were portrayed with a dignity that is often lost today. Domestic life, on the other hand, was only rarely shown. Modern life depicted the latest inventions and achievements, though generally in the form of award or corporate medals. Historical achievements were also recognized, especially as related to the popular events such as the 400th anniversary of the landing of Columbus or the centennial of Lincoln's birth. So here we have an award medal in the upper left, and that's not a dirt farmer. He's very respectable there. And that's the George Robert White Medal of the Massachusetts Horticultural Society by Flanagan. On the upper right, a Brenner Medal for the Aero Club of America award to the Wright brothers, and you can see the new airplane. And at the bottom, the Fuchs Medal for the Hudson Fulton celebration, and that's Henry Hudson on the Half Moon. And Fuchs spent many, many months researching the historical accuracy before portraying Hudson. It's not something that was done off the cuff or just from a picture. Outside of the U.S. Mint, the premier medal issuing organization in this country for more than 150 years has been the American Numismatic Society, which authorized its first medal in 1865 upon the assassination of President Lincoln. Between 1865 and 1890, the Society issued 6 medals, 3 of which required the services of a foreign engraver, Leah Alburn of the Royal Mint of Sweden. Of the more than 20 medals issued between 1893 and the start of World War I, the quality and variety of artistic design, as well as execution, show a remarkable improvement. Surprisingly, this high output was less the result of demand by collectors than it was by the support of wealthy patrons, such as J. Sanford Salters or Edward Adams. And up on top, we have 2 A&S medals. Obviously, the one on the upper left is the Lincoln Medal, 1865, standard portrait to the right, raised rim, not overly imaginative. And on the right, the 1909 New Theater Medal by Bela Lyon Pratt. And, it's a completely different world at that point. That is art. In Europe, the turn of the century saw the establishment of a number of medal societies that issued medals on a regular basis. In this country, where the collecting of non-commemorative medals was slow to catch on, it was not until the creation of the Circle of Friends of the Medallion that medals were promoted as objects to be collected in their own right. In the 6 years of its brief existence, 1909 to 1915, the organization issued a total of 12 medals, each housed in a tan cloth book with a brief descriptive text. The quality of medals produced was very high, with some of the finest sculptors in the country participating. And while not particularly successful, the Circle paved the way for the Society of Medals, which began in 1930. And there we have 2 of the Circle of Friends medals. The one on the left is called Ocean. It's the only medal known by Sigurd Neandros, and the other, 1915, Joan of Arc by Alan Newman. Finally, besides the new technology that enables sculptors to become medalists, the growth of firms capable of making medals should not be overlooked. In the mid-19th century, there were, besides the U.S. Mint, several firms that were largely on the East Coast that were capable of striking medals. However, none of these had quite the impact of the Medallic Art Company, which began operations in about 1903. Using the latest technology and heavily advertising the civic, corporate, and commercial use of medals, the role of the Medallic Art Company in promoting the medal in the United States cannot be overemphasized. And I think I'm out of time, so.
And next, we will hear from Cory Gilliland, Curator Emerita and past Deputy Director of the National Numismatic Collection at the Smithsonian. And she's going to address a topic that I personally find very fascinating, since we don't collect any of the sort of medals that she is going to be telling us about. So, welcome, Cory.
Artists making medals in this century have often broken the mold. Not often, but lots of times have broken the mold. Art medals no longer must be two-sided, display a portrait on the obverse and a related motif on the reverse. They need not be of bronze or other hard metal, of silver or gold. This revolution in medallic art is not unlike that of painting and sculpture in the beginning of the 20th century. Medals exhibited at the Art Medal Congress, thank you, of FIDM, the Fédération des Médailles, in Ottawa, Canada last summer, portray this contemporary trend. Medals are being created in response to an artist's creative impulse. A medal need not be a momentum of an individual or an event, or even a tribute, as seen in the history of medallic art. Medals have indeed joined all other forms of fine art. FIDM President Philip Atwood, in his introduction of the 35th exhibit catalog, called them 3D art on a small scale. Indeed, they are sculpture. Artists are designing contemporary medals that are irregular in shape rather than round. Some are using pierced shapes to let negative space help to define the subject. New materials as glass, plexiglass, resin, ebony, tin, and yes, even yarn and fabric are being selected by the artist. Let me give you a few examples. An Australian artist gathered wood, plastic, a tin plate, and rope, all of which had washed up on the beach, to craft an artistic statement concerning the death of the sea. A Canadian artist, in describing a rebellious girl in Saudi Arabia, fabricated the medal by using cement and graphite. This Danish artist's medal is certainly not round. While the artist of this French medal pierced the form of the bronze and inserted a mirror to define the subject. Sorry, I seem to be having trouble here. Medals now have attachments, as used by this German artist to protest the production of weapons. Found objects as dandelion seeds embedded in acrylic give design to this medal from Great Britain. Medals come in multiples, as this piece from Hungary, or are made of parts. Even an Iranian artist looks to the new definition. As does one from Israel, and a very talented man who made this, who's from Japan. Color permeates a medal from Latvia, while fake fur and yarn define the forms in this Dutch medal. Another Dutch artist used wire and ribbon to craft his portrait. Even objects as old photographs and letters offered the materials for this medal made in Portugal. An artist from the United States borrowed the form of a decoration for his medallic statement. Multiple medals have often replaced the traditional single obverse and reverse of earlier medals in our country. And even future medalists, as children in Canada, were taught to make uniface medals by using the felting technique. They did an amazing job. Yes, the recent medals are different, and for some, they are hard to accept as medals. Critics also tried to dismiss early 20th century painters and sculptors, but as we all know, that didn't work. The artists achieved notable status among the great in art. Medalists today from this century may one day be there. Conforming to tradition has never been the path of art. Thank you.
Time. And while we may collect one period or one theme, we have to take cognizance of that. So the floor is open to comments or to questions. Sir.
Looking at Cory, it's nice to see you again.
Thank you.
It was only a couple of decades ago that I was out at your house for dinner, as you know. Anyway, looking at Cory's things, around my house we have matchboxes, discarded cartons and everything else. It's something in metal because you call it one. If I have a group of rubber bands and put it on a little circle, you call it a metal, it's not a metal. Something that I would not call metal.
Well, it's hard for some people, as I said.
Dave, I'd like to just make one comment about that. What you just said has to do with the definition of a medal, which I explicitly said was not our job. But what you said about your question of whether that is a medal could be turned around to anything. What is an artistic object of any kind? And what is a tree rather than a shrub? There's a valence, a bracket of meaning around all words. And I think Cory has made the point that things have changed, and some people accept it and some people find it hard.
I think some of you may know what was exhibited in Paris as sculpture, a urinal. So that was 100+ years ago, and people didn't accept it then. And, you know, we all have to change our ideas.
If I can just jump in a second here. I have one of my own. At the turn of the 19th century, to the 20th century, when medallic production was changing from the die engraver to the sculptors creating a large version, having it reduced, there was a lot of opposition to that too, especially among the Germans. And there's actually a very nice discussion of that in the Agnes Baldwin's introduction to the 1910 International Exhibition catalog that the A&S put out. So I'd highly recommend that. But there was arguments about that. There are arguments about the use of computers. Whether you like it or not doesn't matter. Things will change. I may not like a whole lot of it. I'll choose not to collect it. That's fine. But it happens. So that's just part of progress of life.
Yes, sir. Yeah. The question was whether the thinking of the medal that Cory showed that had tags attached to it and that made a certain point, whether that could have been accomplished by a more traditional form of medal. Cory?
Well, I think that artist was doing art for us, for now. And 100 years ago or 200 years ago, it would have been a different display, but the people that he was displaying to might have understood it where we might not, but he wouldn't understand the 21st century medals. I think it's who he was talking to.
Because that had such an emotional impact on me, and that was the only way that message, in my mind, could get across to me versus a traditional. So I'm so glad you.
Thank you, that's a great point.
I think you could ask yourself, thinking of Alan Stoll's presentation, how many Americans today would relate to the various depictions of America and recognize America in a feathered-headed Indian? and think of that as a representation of their America. That would be a reversal of your question.
Be better than Make America Great Act,
Ira, can you identify the people who are asking the questions?
I don't know the names. Perhaps they can identify themselves.
I was Christy Dollars. I get this.
Dave? I'm sorry.
I wonder, don't you have to set parameters on each of those dimensions and say it's a metal or not? Otherwise, if you don't, if there's no kind of edge of the envelope, and believe me, I understand that something that is within my envelope may be maybe outside of someone else's envelope, but unless you set an edge of the envelope for each of these dimensions, isn't therefore just logically everything a metal? I mean, isn't like the Washington Monument metal? Isn't a tree a metal? Isn't the bottle of water a metal? If you don't say, no, a metal is made of these kinds of, maybe or maybe not made of these kinds of fabrics. It's this sort of size or not. It has this sort of object or not.
Let me ask you a question. Can you define a nation? Because you'll find many different definitions today, and so the word in your ears, just as the word metal in your ears means something, and to somebody else, democracy, you name it, it'll have a spectrum of understanding that only in commonality becomes definitive. If I ask you to define very, if I ask you to define anything, you will find that people will disagree with you unless you live in the same society. So that's a generic that is going to apply to what is a metal. But of course, the collector panel will be discussing the choice of what one collects and whether one wants to set boundaries or one wants to be more general.
It's like collages. I mean, is a collage a painting? It's glued on things, you know, but it's defined as a painting.
Maybe it's a matter of what ends up being a commonly understood definition.
Where?
And that common understanding evolves so that when we talk about art, what was Impressionist art in the late 19th century was not commonly understood as art, and so that at that time not commonly understood as art, whereas today it's very commonly understood as art, whereas some of these things were not today commonly understood as metals, and perhaps, or perhaps not, they may come to be considered as metals, more common.
I think you hit the nail right on the head. In the conference of the FIDEM, which is artist-driven and modern artist-driven, that was in Ottawa, where I also attended, the concept of art trended in the direction of what Cory is showing, which came from that exhibit. In this particular room, we have gathered a group of people who are like you and me, who don't necessarily go for that, but they're two different groups. So the question about art in general is, says who?
But aren't there?
Yes, sir. Yeah, you're next.
So, this is related to something you said in your presentation. I believe you said that some of these secret society metals weren't necessarily called metals, they were called apples. So I'm going to, take that question a step further and ask, if we go back way back in history, hundreds of years, did they refer to metals that we consider today as metals, or did they have another term? Have they always been metals?
Well, the term metals, as Bob Hoge mentioned, used to be applied to coins. They're made of metal, and they're described in all early literature, by which I mean before the 19th century. All coins are called metals. So again, you're talking about a change in the case of art in fashion, in the case of vocabulary in valence of what you mean when you say something.
When you say coins or metal,
They were called metals.
So was currency a metal? In the coins that you used was currency, would that be called a metal?
No, ancient coins were called metals.
Normally, an out-of-date or non-current coin was a metal. For a lot of what John Sally refers to, what today might be, is today called a ticket or badge or pass, were very popular at the time. And again, just a slight variation, but they had a slightly different function. But still, there's nothing wrong with calling it a metal. It's, you know, and you know, but at the time, they weren't so concerned about definition.
There probably are a couple things that we could all agree on, though, in trying to define metal. Basically, who here would disagree with the idea that a metal has to be small enough to be handheld sculpture? I would submit that a yapstone is not a metal. Now, is it a coin? No, it's not a coin either.
John Sally started this conversation, and the answer has already been given. Words mean different things to different people, and unless we agree to what they mean, they just mean different things to different people. The current word for a 3-foot plaque is a plaque, okay? In my vocabulary, maybe in many other people's vocabulary. I agree with Bob that most people in this room would think of a medal as something that be contained within the hand, and that something that can't be contained within the hand is still, for most people, outside the bonds. And has lowered the boom. So thank you for your attention.